So this is LiGO end user training, and this is a repeat from Monday's session. And the agenda is we will be reviewing the training objectives and then giving you a brief overview of LiGO and how to log into the system, and then cover some basics. This session is mainly just to get you started on how to work with the vehicles, real-time historic tracks, as well as interacting with the maps, and then doing some of the business roles such as the events and alarms, notifications, reports, and then geofences. And then at the end, we'll just briefly talk about some of the additional functionality that's available, and then questions and answers. So my name is Rhett Harman. I'm the trainer today. My official title is Service Delivery Manager here at Marshall. And I know there's a group of staff there, so we won't do all introductions, but just wanted to let you know who I am. The training objectives today, we're going to show you how to just log into the system and go through some of the basics to get you started, and then we can always have a follow-up session to get into some more in-depth things after you at least be able to navigate and do some basic things in the system, and then again, we can follow up with some more advanced training later on. And then here's just some additional things that in terms of objectives for today. So in terms of logging into the system, you just need any web browser. We do recommend either Chrome, Firefox, or typically two of the better web browsers, but it does work with any browsers. And then just type in ligo.marshallgis.com. It'll prompt you. You put in your first initial of your first name and your full last name. And then you have a password set LiGO for you. And once you log in, please change your password under the settings drop-down menu. There's a change password option where you can then change this. So LiGO is essentially a platform as a service or platform. Basically, it's a hosted solution where we can connect up your assets, your equipment that's in the field, whether it's vehicles, heavy vehicles. It can be other things like lawnmowers, ATVs, trailers, and pretty much any asset that's out in the field. You can connect to those and also be able to connect up to some of the onboard sensors of those systems to actually identify when equipment is engaged, PTO, broom up, broom down, and some of the other equipment that you have on your vehicles. And then that information can then be passed over to your business systems. So things like Lucidi, ESRI, information that's being captured can then be leveraged in those other business systems without hand data entry and those sort of things. So in terms of LiGO, we do provide the complete solution from the hardware, all of the various devices that, depending on the type of asset you're wanting to have tracked, could be from, as I mentioned, heavy, lightweight, trailers. So it's different types of assets, even boats, or and we can connect to things like smartphones, laptops, tablets, and those sort of things as well. And then we have a secure VPN connection where information is essentially transferred to our hosted database system, where we have redundancy, backups, and all of that. All you need, again, is a web browser to be able to access the information. And then this information we can use what's called our LiGO Access that can provide the data integration to your other business systems as well. Just a little bit on the screen layout. When you initially log in, you're going to see a map on the left, and then you're going to see your vehicles, assets on the right. So you'll see a list of vehicles. Depending on which division you're in, you'll see your view and your vehicles that you're working with. And when you click on a vehicle in the right, it will center on the map for that specific vehicle or asset. And you can also go back in time and view historic tracks. Down in the lower right, there's a tracks tab which gives you the linear tracks. So these are these linear tracks. And then there's also a track points tab which gives you what are called breadcrumbs, or each individual record if you're wanting to get to that level of data. In the upper left-hand upper column here, there's a variety of drop-down menus that you can access your reports or access other information. As I mentioned, there's a settings drop-down menu. That's where you change your password. But you can also access a number of different tools depending on what you want to do in the system, whether it be Windows. There's a variety of tools under there. And workspaces, so you can set up your own workspaces within the system, meaning the user interface. So you can actually drag and drop tabs around, make a bigger map, and do a variety of things to make it sort of custom for yourself. And then there's also a map toolbar that allows you to interact with the map, zooming in, zooming out. We're going to cover that in a little bit more detail here in a minute. Down in the lower left, you'll see an Events tab and a Geofence tab. And that's where you can see some of those rules or business rules that are occurring, whether it be maybe a speeding event or idling or other types of events occurring in that Events tab. And then the Geofence tab is where you can either set up your geofences or view geofences, and those are essentially boundaries, areas for keeping track of time in an area or keeping track of time when a vehicle leaves an area. And then there's also the concept of views. So you can have, right now based on what vehicles you manage, you're going to have a view set up. So for example, here's a WW-DIST for distribution, but there's other ones specifically maybe for planning or building or other groups. And so you can create subgroups, and that just essentially filters down what you see, which vehicles that you see, based on these views. So really the difference between a view is filtering down the data just to specifically a subset of data, whereas workspaces are more related to the user interface of how things look in terms of rearranging the user interface. On the Vehicles tab, again in the upper right-hand corner, you have columns. There's sort of default columns for name, last seen, track, and status. The status gives you what the vehicle is doing at the moment. So it gives you a quick view of what the vehicle is doing. So if you see a green arrow, that means it's actually moving. If you see a blue, that means it's idling. And idling means that the vehicle is on but just not moving. Red box means that it's parked, so it's parked and the engine's off. Offline means, a lot of times the offline means that it hasn't actually connected yet, so you shouldn't see too many of those. And then pending means that a lot of times if a vehicle's in, say, an underground or in a parking garage, it hasn't got a GPS connection yet until it pulls out. So in other words, the vehicle's turned on, but it needs to essentially drive out of that parking garage to get a GPS fix, and then once it gets a fix, then it'll turn to this green color here. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about here, so that was sort of the overview, we're going to talk about working with the vehicles, which is a key part of this. So and working with the vehicle, so on your Vehicles tab, you can sort by any of these columns. So you can sort, you can also enter in information in this little box. If you're looking for a specific vehicle, you can search for it, and it'll just bring up that particular vehicle in the list. Or even if there's information on the vehicle, such as the equipment or the vehicle type or other things that you have set on the vehicle, you can search by it and it'll come up in your list here. The track checkbox is if you're wanting to actually view details about that vehicle, such as the historic tracks or track points, as you check those boxes next to it as well. You can also right-click on these column headers and add additional columns into this. So in other words, if you want to see idle or speed or other types of things, you can add those as well. One thing you can do is you can right-click on a vehicle, and it gives you a list of things that you can do. So once you right-click on the vehicle, you can zoom to different levels: street level, city level, region level. You can also draw today's tracks. So that's a key thing, is just right-click, draw today's tracks, and it'll draw everything that vehicle has done, at least for today. You may see these red circles. What those are stop times. So you can see here, for example, 32-minute stops here, 5 minutes here. So it's a quick way to see where the vehicle stopped. There's also the concept of buckets. So if you have a long list of vehicles, let's say maybe you're in planning or the distribution where you have a list and you want to focus in on maybe 3 vehicles, you can just right-click and put them in a bucket. And then there's a little drop-down arrow up here where you can just show that bucket. And so that way you'll only see those 3 vehicles that you're dealing with. So it's just a way, it's a temporary filter to just show those. Once you log out and log back in, it basically goes back to what you had before. Besides drawing today's track by right-clicking on the vehicle, you can also go and view historic tracks from yesterday, last week, last month. Just by clicking that track that I mentioned earlier, you check the track checkbox. And then down below here, you can pick the schedule of time of when you want to see those tracks. So you can put your start day and then your stop day, and then hit this little search button, and it'll bring all of those days tracks for those. And you can see real quick when the vehicle started its day, when it stopped, and its whole distance that it drove. So this is the first step, is picking the track, picking the day or days. So you're not limited to, you don't have to pick just one day. You could actually pick multiple days, and you can also pick multiple vehicles. But then you just draw those tracks, and it'll draw the track for the day or days that you pick. Another very useful tool along the same lines is essentially the same steps. The only difference is that you pick the replay button, and it brings this little replay dialog up here. And that allows you to sort of start, you can start your vehicle and actually see where it's driving, where it drove. And you can speed it up or slow it down. You can also grab this little box and drag it to a particular time and sort of replay. So it just gives you sort of a visual, or essentially a replay option of where the vehicle drove. And this might be useful, especially if you have a lot of tracks where they're driving all over, so you can sort of see their route. You can also do this with multiple vehicles as well, so you can see where vehicles are coming together or those sort of things, and maybe another way of maybe improving routes or that sort of thing. If you're wanting to get down not just to the linear level, but you want to get down to the individual breadcrumbs, you go to track points, you pick on that track points tab, and then it gives you every single record down to the second of what the vehicle is doing. And one of the things we have is the concept of smart tracking. And so the more the vehicle is doing things like turning, accelerating, if it's got some of the sensors connected up, it sends up more data, so it gets more accurate information. And you can, just like up above here, you can turn on additional columns just by right-clicking on any of these column headers and adding additional fields like speed. And there's a lot more data that's being collected, especially if we're talking about connecting to sensors. So when PTO is on, you can turn that on, or other sorts of information that you may want to see here. and when you click on a record over on the right, it'll go to the map and show you the location on the map. Or you can also click on the map on the track, and then it'll show you the record over here. You can export the data out in a variety of formats. So if you want to bring it in to another system, you can just do that. And you can also click on the show graph format. The graph is helpful to sort of see more of from a visual graphic standpoint, where maybe speed is an option where you can click on the high speed, the top of the speed, and then it'll go to the map for where you click on the graph. So wherever you click on the graph, it goes to the map. So just sort of an interactive way of seeing the data. So let me get out and actually get into the map here. So we have, as you can see when I logged in here, I'm in the www-dist view. So I'm seeing those vehicles, and I'm seeing the vehicles over here on the right side. So as you notice here, I've got one screen currently moving. I've got some that are currently idling at the moment, and anytime I click on one, it'll sort of recenter on the map here. If I I can just enter in if I'm looking at just wanting to look at one particular one, I can click on that one, and if I want to, I can right-click on that vehicle and draw today's tracks. So it gives me sort of a view of where that vehicle drove. You can see there's little arrows for the direction here for that. And then it gives me, below here, it gives me the start, and then it gives me the stop time and the distance that it's driven so far today. I can also click on this replay option. So the replay gives me a visual of sort of where the vehicle drove here. And so it's going to head up here and see it stopped at that location. And then it's driving to that location. And then it's been sort of basically parked at that location for a while. And I can grab this and move it back if I wanted to. I can pause it at any given time. So it's just a way to sort of go back and do a replay option of that. If I wanted to, say, look at more of a historic view, and I can also, I'll show this in the map, but you can zoom into an area here, just to give you an idea of sort of the park there for 5 minutes. So if I hover over that, I can see when they arrived, 7:47, and they left at 7:52 at that location right there. Zoom back out here. So you notice I've got one of 23 here because I did the search just to see this one. But I can close, I can hit that X and then it'll bring out the rest of the vehicles again. If I want, I'll show you a different vehicle here. Let's go to 2296. And if I want to go back in time, let's say I want to go back for the month, I can go back from August 1st through August 16th to the search here. And then it can give me all of the days that this vehicle has driven for the month of August. And it gives me a quick, again, when they start, when they stop, and the distance for the day. And so let me look at 13th here. I can draw that. So you can see on the 13th, covered quite a bit of an area here. You may notice, again, we have these stops at these various locations here. Again, I can hover over. If you see cases where you see a number, a large number, what that means is there's actually 2 stops in that location. And then once you get closer, it breaks it out into those 2 different stops. So it's just because it's sort of zoomed out, it consolidates it until you get in a little closer where it then can break it out into those two different stops there, for example. If we want to look at a little bit more detail here, we can come into the Track Points tab, and I can, if you notice I've got date, time, alt, I can right-click here, and I can turn on or off different information. So I turned on speed, and so I can sort based on these columns. So maybe looking at this particular one, I can click here, it gives me that location for where that speeding location is. I can export this data out into a variety of formats. I can show this in a graph form here. And again, I can click on anywhere on the graph, and then it's going to go to that location from the graph. So again, we can see a location here of where a vehicle stopped as well. Okay, so let me go back. That's sort of working with the vehicles themselves. The next thing we're going to cover is working with the map. So there's a toolbar that you can essentially dock or move around the map, but for the most part, what this allows you to do is you can zoom in to a particular location just by dragging a box. You can zoom to the extent of all your vehicles by clicking this little X. There's also an address, or you can identify the address. So there's this option. You just drag it onto a, let's say a vehicle is parked at a location. You can drag that and plop it on that location, and it'll give you the address or latitude and longitude for that location. You can also clear the map. So if you've got a lot of tracks drawn, you can clear the map so it's clear. There's also a back button. Essentially, if you zoom into an area, for example, you can hit the back and it'll go back to where you were before. We're going to cover this area search. This is a very useful tool that we're going to cover in a little bit more detail here in a minute. There's also a measurement tool, so you can measure distance, feet, yards, miles. And there's also a tool that allows you, versus this one where you can find out what the address or latitude and longitude is, this actually lets you search based on latitude and longitude or address. So it's sort of the reverse of that. And then there's also a layers where you can turn on or off layers that are on the map as well. I showed this earlier, but there's up in the right-hand corner, there's a satellite option where you can switch to a satellite view. This is helpful to be able to see building footprints or parking lots or other things besides just sort of the street view option. Below those drop-down menus, there's a number of little checkboxes that you can do to allow for interacting with the vehicles. Some of the key things are show trace. So trace just, it has a little tail behind the vehicle, just giving you showing where the direction of how the vehicle is going. It's not really used for the purpose of the track, but it's more of allowing you to see that the vehicle is moving and in which direction it's moving. And then another key one is this follow selected. Follow selected means that if you have that checked and you have a vehicle selected in the right, it'll constantly be centered on the map with that vehicle. So just keep that in mind. If you check that, it's always going to have that vehicle sort of in the center. If you want to go look at another vehicle, you'll just have to uncheck that. But by default, that is turned off. The area search, so this is a really helpful tool. Another term for this is sort of a proof of presence. So this may be useful if you're sort of investigating a situation, maybe whether a vehicle was there or not there. Perhaps an example might be that someone the public was complaining about maybe that someone ran a stoplight or ran over a mailbox or something, you can essentially go to that address and then draw a box, put in your time frame, and this can either be over multiple days or it can get down into hours. So you can pick the same day, 8 to 10 o'clock a.m. And then you hit the search, and it's going to bring all vehicles that were in that area within basically your query parameters here. And it'll show you where the vehicle went through that area, and you can also narrow it down even further by what are called event rules. So things like if you're doing things like street sweeping, for example, you could say, were they street sweeping in that area? And then it would bring up all vehicles that were street sweeping in that area, or speeding in that area, or whatever else you want to sort of filter it down by further. In the Windows drop-down, there's a number of things that are available, dispatch, but one key thing is the street view. This is helpful sort of to give you a bird's eye view and as well as a windshield view of what the vehicle is seeing. So you have this over here, this view. If you have a vehicle selected and you pick the street view, it gives you a little image from above, and then it also gives sort of out what they're seeing outside of their windshield, just to give you an idea of their general, what the street might look like, or the houses nearby, or that sort of thing. There is also a real-time traffic option that gives you, if it's red, then it's heavy traffic, green, it's light traffic, and it will show things like if there's an accident or if there's construction on the road and that sort of stuff as well. Okay, so let me go back here and sort of interact with the map. So we can go, if we go here, we can go back out to the full extent of our vehicles. We can also zoom in to a particular location as well. The things that I like to use, if you have a wheel on your mouse, you can actually go in and out with the wheel. You can also double-click on the map to zoom in. So you have a variety of options. There's also this plus or minus as well that you can get in and out of the map. As I mentioned, there is also the address option. So if we come in to, let's go here, where there might be near a house. So for example, I could grab this address tool and then drop it right there, and then it would give me an address sort of wherever I drop that location here. Clear map, again, clears the tracks or whatever you have on the map. There's also the back option that lets you go back as well. You can also search by address or intersection, so you can come down in the lower left-hand corner. And so, for example, if I put 4801 rice mine, and I click that, it's going to go to that location. I can zoom in here a little closer. So that's a way. On intersections, what you can do is you can actually put the street names. So you can do, if, for example, New Watermelon Road and Rice Mine, and you'd use either the ampersand or the and it would go to the intersection. So you can either enter the address or enter the intersection there. But one thing is if you had a call, perhaps there was some issue that happened at this address. Maybe a customer called and they're complaining about something that happened at this location. You can use this area search tool. So let me just turn on my satellite view so I can get a better view of the area here. And then I can just drag a box over that area. And let's say the problem was back on the 13th. So I'm just going to go between the 12th and the 14th, do a search find out what vehicle was in that area. If I just click on it, it gives me sort of a quick blue view of that. But I can also right-click on it and draw the full track to get an idea of the track location here. And I can see they stopped for 15 minutes at that location. And it gives me when they entered, 9:03, and they left at 9:20 within that box there. So just a helpful tool. As I mentioned, you can also narrow it down even further by some of the other, maybe PTO on, or if you had other things like street sweeping on, or other speeding, etc. You can do that as well. There's also a measurement tool, so I can measure a distance, and all I have to do is just click one location and click another, and it gives me feet, yards, miles as well. So different ways of interacting with the map. Again, I can come back to this view, clear my view there, and this is dockable, so you can move it around wherever you would like to there. Okay, so let me go back to the PowerPoint. And now we're going to cover, this is where we get down into the real value of this system, is in the alarms, events, and notifications. So these are essentially business rules that define things that are happening perhaps with the vehicle, what the vehicle is doing, or that sort of thing that can be set up in the system. So alarms, the concept of alarms is really a graphical view on the map of something that's occurred, whether it be an idling or speeding event. And you can essentially set different icons for these sort of events or alarms that are happening. And in the lower left-hand corner, there's an Events tab, and this is where you can either see real-time events that are occurring, or you can go back in time and look at events. And each event has a color code that's set up for them. You can change the color codes, but those color codes define, which event is related. So as an example, this is red. This is idling. The other ones that are blue here are speeding. And this is sort of a time window or timeline where you can either come up here and pick a little calendar for going back in time and looking at an event, or you can just drag the green box over the color, and then where you drag the box, it brings up all of the events that fall within that green area there. And when you click on one of these, it'll go to the map for that location of where that occurred. These are the events. The events are also related to reports. So I'm going to go ahead and cover reports, because every event also goes into reports. So some of the out-of-the-box reports that are included, things like trip and idle report, time on site, vehicle utilization, speeding, harsh driving, productivity. So these are some of the standard reports that are in the system. They can all be set up at different schedules, daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly. There's also additional reports that are in the system, and you can create your own reports. All the reports are also, you can set them on a schedule to be emailed to you, so you don't necessarily have to log into the system to get reports. So once you sort of build a report and you've got it working for you, and you want them on a particular time frame, you just set them up to be emailed, and they just go right into your inbox, and you can take a look at those as well. So example, trip and idle. Trip and idle is really giving you trips, so when the vehicle starts, when it stops, how long it's idle. So some cases you may expect vehicles to be idling because they're doing things at a location, or but then other cases you may expect a vehicle to be more doing trips, more driving time. And then so it sort of gives you a quick different like percent idle, percent driving, the amount of driving, the amount of idle, and the percentage of that in that report. Vehicle utilization report is really, it's primarily used for seeing how much the vehicle is used, and this is helpful from the standpoint of maybe a fleet, someone that's concerned about their fleet and when vehicles need to come in for maintenance, or you're actually looking at purchasing vehicles, and you can see, maybe there's certain vehicles that are not being utilized as much that could be sort of put into a sort of a pool or reutilized. There's a speeding report. So speeding report gives you, obviously, when a vehicle's speeding. We have event rules that are set up. So there's some default when these trigger. Right now it's 7 miles over the speed limit, but that can be adjusted. And these speeding reports are by road type. So you may have things like arterials, collectors, residential, highway. They all have different posted speed limits, and so you can set, again, by those different groups. You can also set like a max speed that you want to be emailed automatically when it hits the max speed, for example. One thing in these reports is it has a link to the map. So you run the report, you see these little links. You can click on the link next to the date here, and it'll go to the map to show you where that location is, for example. All right, so let's go back out and look at events and look at some of the reports. So let's go back out. So if you notice here, we've got a few events that are occurring. So these are live events. And these icons that are flashing, I can hover over to see what the event is, so idling. And if you notice down below in my lower left, I've got 3 out of 3. So that means there's currently 3 events that are occurring at the moment. And if I click on this, I can sort of see those particular events. I can also go back in time and look at events. So if I just drag the box over an area, it's going to bring, wherever this box is, it's going to bring all the events that are within this box down below here. Of course, I can expand this up to view those, and then as I pick on these, it sort of recenters on the map. If you notice, again, we have these large numbers, so that means it's sort of consolidated these events into, there's 9 here, there's 3 here. So as we sort of get in closer, again, these sort of expand out. And notice the numbers shrinking as I get out here. So just like over here where we can turn on additional fields, we can also do that here. Or we can add fields like we want to see posted speed limit or other types of things. If you're wanting to focus on one particular event in your sort of window here, you can come up here and you can uncheck. So here's all the different types of event roles. We can uncheck them all. Maybe just focus in on, I just want to look at the actual speed limit, speeding events. You can turn that on. And as you notice, that this one's set to yellow, so that might be a little difficult to see. We could change the color of that so that it's a different color, and I'll show you where that's set here in a minute. But that's how you can sort of turn on or off some of those events. We'll go back to the live view here. So those events that you see are all set up in what are called event rules. And I'm not going to go into too much detail on this, but this could be covered in a more advanced section. But these event rules are what define these things that you're seeing on the map as well as the report. So when we talked about actual speed limit and that yellow setting, this is all set up in this one particular event rule called actual speed limit. And there's basically, there's a wizard that walks you through where you can create these event rules, and then you can define it for specific vehicle groupings. So this particular one's for all vehicles, but you could create a new one and just have it for your group of vehicles or even down to a specific vehicle itself. You can set these up on a schedule, so you can have it always active, or you can say, I just want to know during work hours, or I want to know when this vehicle is used after hours, or those sort of things. That can be set up here. Your expressions are what sort of sets up the rules based on what you're doing. So this particular one is what's called a speeding expression. We're going to cover in a little bit here a geofence expression, which is a little bit different. But the speeding expression, this shows you, again, for each road type, there's a 7-mile-hour over the speed limit. That's essentially when that gets triggered. If as the city you decide, well, we want it to be set at 10 miles, we can just come in here and change this to 10 miles that it actually triggers. You can set up a delay on some of these things. This may not be the best case, a speeding one you probably would want, but there may be other cases where you want to delay. For example, idling might be an example. You want it to delay for 2 minutes, or you want it to delay for 5 minutes until it actually triggers. That can be set up here. Notifications, there's a lot of different notification options. There can be notifications on the map. There can be email notifications that go to you if you want to be notified immediately when this event occurs. And we're going to cover that in a little bit more detail here. And then also the presentation. So presentation is related to those alarms that I was talking about earlier. That's if you actually want it to be displayed on the map. So you don't have to have, not all cases of events you want to display on the map. Maybe you just want to report for those. But if you want it to display on the map, you enable display on the map. This is that color coding that I was referring to. So this is where you can change the color of this. If you wanted it down below here to be a different color in your window, you just change that here. You can change the icon. You can either do some of the out-of-the-box icons, or you can have a custom icon for what shows on the map. You can have a label for that. So if you want it to say idling, or you want the vehicle name or other things, you can set that as well. So anyways, that's all. This is all how you sort of present that alarm on the map, so to speak. So that's just one of many different types of events that are set up. And we'll go into some of that in a little bit more detail here in a minute. Besides the events, there's also the reports. So we have some of the reports that are already in the system here. I ran a report earlier. This is a utilization report. So for example, this gives all vehicles what the utilization is for these. So if you look at the top, days in use, total trips, total miles, average miles per day. So you notice at the top we have a few vehicles that are not really utilized that much. Those may be candidates for maybe repurposing potentially, or if the city is looking at buying vehicles, these could potentially be used there. And then down below, if you get down to some of these, we get some that are being used a lot every day. So those may be candidates for coming in for service or those sort of things. Some other reports we have, so for example, we run the speeding report, and let's just generate that. So this is on all vehicles, so this is probably going to be a lot. Probably could have done it just on the W distribution group here, but this is going to be for all vehicles. So we've got a list of the vehicles. It gives the speed limit, what the vehicle actually drove, and then the road type here. Again, you have links on the map for the location. So, and that's probably a vehicle. So the view that I'm in is in W distribution. So it's probably a vehicle that's not W distribution. But basically, if you, in your view, you run that for your particular view, you click on this, it's going to go to the map and show you the location there. Oh, sorry, the speeding one here. And when you run that, you can email this to someone after you run it. So you can change this to another person. You can email it. You can change the formats. You can, of course, print it out as well. And if you notice here, I just ran it for a day, but you have options for choosing other days. One thing I will mention is a couple things on the performance of running reports. Obviously, when you run it on all the vehicles, it's going to take a little longer than if you do it, say, on a subset. And that's all associated with tags. So you may, if you're working with just your particular group, you're probably just going to see your vehicles, so it's going to be smaller. But if you are someone like a fleet person that's working across everything, just keep that in mind. If you're running it on all the vehicles, it's going to take a little longer. Also, if it's a long period of time, so if you're running it, daily versus a whole month, it's going to take a little longer. So that's one thing where once you figure out reports that you want, you may want to set them up on a schedule just to be emailed, especially if they're larger, so they can just be sent to you. The other thing is what we do is we cache the data. So if you have a report already created, it is going to cache it for the previous day. So if you run a report on today, that data has not been cached yet. So it may take a little longer than, say, if you run it for yesterday. It's going to be a lot faster because the data has already been cached. So just keep that in mind. Some other reports. Let's see. So we've got, say, productivity report. I can run this. Let's see what vehicles. We'll just leave that. Generate that. So this gives some basic information about their trips. So when they start, when they end, total duration, and then it sort of summarizes at the end for that vehicle the total distance and total duration of how long they were, the trips they were doing, for example. So again, just look at some of these reports when you have time. There's harsh driving, etc. There's also the ability to create additional reports or manage the reports that you have. So under Manage Reports, one of the key sort of templates that you can use to create your own reports is what's called Event Rule. So there's a lot of different report templates, but this Event Rule one is a key one that you can create your own report. So if you open that, this lets you define your report. So you can change the title. You can change the subtitle. You can change the format to what you want. You can change the time frame for when you need the report. As we talked about earlier, event rules. So you could set your event rule, so idling, or it might be a geofence event rule or speeding event rule. For example, actual speed limit. And then the tag is associated to maybe the group of vehicles that we're talking about. So for example, I'm in W distribution. Maybe I'm just doing speeding for W distribution. I have some specific things there. So you can basically build your own report based on the event rule. And then once you get the report exactly how you want, you can then set it up on a schedule to be emailed. So you can say, every week I want this report, and I want it on, say, a Monday, and I want it at 6 a.m. And then you can choose the recipient for who gets this. So maybe it's the W distribution manager, and then you save that, and then essentially you're just going to get reports emailed to you on the schedule that you have set up here. So that's really helpful. Once you figure out the report that you want, is just having these sort of things where you just get them emailed to you on a particular time frame. So, and you can come in, if you've, say, created a report, you can come in and edit those reports as well after you've created them. So that's a little bit about the events and reports. Let me go back here. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to go through an entire process here in a minute. So we're going to cover geofences and points of interest, and then what we'll do is when we cover those, we'll actually create those. We'll create an event rule, and we'll create a report to sort of show you the whole workflow. So geofences and points of interest. So geofences are boundaries, and you can decide whether you want to track time inside an area or track outside an area. So a case might be, for inside, might be maybe a dump zone, or it might be a park, or it might be, let's say, a fuel station or something where you want to know when a vehicle arrives, how long they're there, and when they depart. So that's where geofences can be helpful. You can create these geofences over on the right-hand side here, and you can group those. And grouping is a key thing that you want to do to utilize the event rules as well as grouping them together. So an example might be, you might have a group called parks, and then you put each individual park name in that group. Or as you can see here, these like dump site, multiple dump sites as a group, for example. You have the ability to create different types of geofences, so you can do just a circle just by clicking, and then it essentially expands out. You can set the radius, 100 yards from a particular location, for example. One of the key ones that we typically use is what's called polygon. So that allows you to actually create around, especially if it's an odd shape, like a yard or something. You can just create, just click around and create that area. You can also create what's called a route geofence, and you can either create that, same thing, you can set the radius, let's say 50 feet, 50 yards from the center line, and creates a route. That might be helpful for things such as maybe solid waste where you're on a route, or maybe a transit or something, some sort of transportation where they're on a route and you want to know the time that they're on the route, time they've completed that route, or those sort of things. And you can actually create one of these geofence routes or route geofence from an existing track. So you can right-click on the track and actually create a route geofence from an existing where they've driven in the past as well. So once you've created your geofence, the next step is really creating the event rule for that. So that way you can define what it is that you want to know what they're doing, whether it being inside or outside. And in that expression, you pick the geofence expression, and that's all related to geofences, for example. And once you've picked the geofence expression, then you want to pick your specific group. So as an example here, you have dump site, and then you decide whether you want to know when the vehicle's inside, and there's a little drop down, or you can pick outside there. And then you have a whole list of options for setting up notifications. They can be things like arguments, where it shows in your down in your event rules tab, or it could be an email that goes to someone. It can be specific things that you want to show in a report. So a lot of different options there in terms of notifications. Once you've picked your notification, then you can set up some specific things of how it displays. Like, for example, if it's an email, this is an argument, but if it's an email, you can say the vehicle name left, and then you say which geofence it is, and then when it comes into the inbox, then you would see that specific thing come up in your notification based on how you have it set up there. Same thing with the presentation and how it's displayed. You can decide whether you want that sort of event to show. You can set up labels on how it's displayed on the label when it occurs. So this example on the right is left a route geofence, for example, and then it would show things on the map when it leaves that area. Then finally, is after you have the geofence created, you have the event rule created, then you can create your report. And so this is just an example of left an area. and you have that report that you create, and this is just utilizing that event rule report, and you sort of define the titles and everything. But you have those links on the map where you can click, and it'll actually show where they left, for example, the geofence area from the report itself. Or the other one, sort of the flip side of that, is time insight. So this is an example, City of Boise, where they're tracking time inside parks, for example. The same concept, it's the same concept with points of interest as geofences. The only thing is it's obviously a point and not an area. And these are easy to set up in that you can use a spreadsheet, for example. If you had a list of addresses, you can just import those in, and then it's the same concept as when the vehicle arrives at that location, keeps track of the duration. And so these could be things like you have all the addresses for all the fuel stations, or you have all the city buildings, or you have I don't know, like building inspection locations, or assets, or warehouses, or et cetera, and you can have those in based on different categories. So you can set them up in categories or sort of groupings, and you can decide whether you want these points of interest to display on the map or not. You can have different colors, or when they actually turn on or off. And you can also just right-click on the map and add a new point of interest as well. Add point of interest. Set the name of it with a description, and then put it into a category, for example. And this can give you reports, other reports like time on site report. So it gives you, when they arrive, arrival time, departure, duration, what the site name is, what category it's in, et cetera, can all be shown in this type of report. And you can have a reverse report of this as well. Just as a note, you can have a time off-site. So if, for example, you have all of locations where vehicles are supposed to be going and they didn't stop there, it can give you sort of a reversal of that. Rather than showing when vehicles are at a site, if you could have when vehicles did not go to a particular site, for example. And this is also another report that's used are the productivity reports use these points of interest as well, and some of the other reports that are in the system. Okay, so let's go back and go through the whole process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically start off by creating a geofence, and I think, let me see here, let me draw this track. Okay, so I'm going to, I think I did this before, so I'm going to come into this location here, and we'll just pretend, I don't know what this is, but we'll pretend it's a McDonald's. So, and let me just, I think, okay, yeah. I'm going to go ahead and delete this one. This is one I created earlier, so I'm going to edit group. Okay, so the first step is, what we're going to do is down in the geofence is we're going to create a new geofence boundary. And so you can either click this, but usually what you want to do is over just to the right of geofence, there's a little arrow drop down, and you can pick your type that you want. So in this case, I want to pick a new polygon. And so all you have to do is you just click around the area, and you don't have to be perfect to start, because you can actually, you can zoom in after you've created the general boundary, and you can move it around based on these little boxes. So I can drag the box and sort of, and I can of course zoom in and get this exactly if you want it exact, but this just allows you to sort of move the area. And then once you have it, the the boundary the way you like it, then you can create a group. So we can call this restaurant. And we can, let's see, actually let me put the name in here so we can call this, let's say this is a McDonald's. We can put more of a description here, and we can add this new group called restaurant. And then we can save that. And so now, now down below we've got this restaurant, and when I click that, it sort of zooms to that location, and you can see it on the map here. Let me clear my tracks. But I now have a geofence boundary. So right now I can't do anything because I have no rules set up for this. So, but I have my boundary, and I could create additional, like let's say over here is a Wendy's or something. I could add a Wendy's to this group or something along those lines. But so I have that boundary. My next step is I need to create some sort of a rule that I want to define for that. So this is just a wizard that walks you through the process of this. And let's see. So inside, so I did this before, so it's already available. So inside McDonald's, and then I can choose which vehicles that these are associated to. So this is, again, based on the tag. So I just want to do this based on www.dist vehicles. I could set this up on a schedule if I wanted to. I could, again, maybe I just want during work hours, but in this case I'm just going to do it always active. And then this is the key thing, is the expression. So in the drop-down menu, there's a number of expressions that are available. And this is a whole other session on some of the different types, but the one that we're going to be looking at is the geofence expression. We covered the one with the speeding expression. A lot of the event rules are associated with these two, which are analog and digital. So digital is things like on-off. It might be a PTO, or it might be, basically it's a Boolean 1 or 0 cases, where maybe it's ignition or, again, PTO. But anyways, there's points of interest and there's other options. But the thing we're going to cover here is geofence. So I pick geofence. Then what I do is I want to pick my group that I'm going to be, that I created earlier. So as you recall, I created that group called restaurant, and I want to know when the vehicle goes inside. I could pick outside, but you know, like if you're leaving a yard, you may want to use, or you've created yards or those sort of things, you could use outside. But I'm just going to use inside a restaurant. I want to do it an immediate event, so I don't want to delay that. So I'm just going to go next there. Then I'm going to pick my notification. So perhaps I want to send an email alert in this case. So this gives me essentially options for who's going to be the recipient and what is the subject in the email going to say. So the recipient in this case is going to be the WDist manager that's going to get this. And then what I want to do is I want to identify what vehicle that went in and what's the geofence that they went in. So in the drop-down menu, I can come down here, and all I have to do is pick vehicle name. So it'll automatically put the vehicle name in there, and I want to say vehicle name is inside, and then I'm going to essentially identify the geofence. So if I come up here, I can, rather than me typing the name, I can just put in the geofence name tag, and it's automatically going to identify the geofence name, which would be McDonald's here. So it'd say whichever vehicle name it is inside, and then in this case it would be McDonald's would come up in the subject line there. And then you just go next. Now, so you can decide whether you want this to display on the map or not. So maybe in this case, I don't want it to display because I just want, I just basically want to be notified when they go in. You can, of course, you can go and see it. So it's available for you to go to the map. It's just whether you want it to actually display on the map. So I'm just going to say no. I can go next and then basically save that. Save that event rule. So I'll go ahead and save that. And again, the event rule is inside McDonald's. So I've created the geofence boundary. I've created my rule, which says I want to know when they come inside the boundary. The last step is the report. So I want to report. So I come up to Manage Reports here. I go to my drop-down, and as you recall, the event rule is one of the key sort of templates to use to create some of these reports. So I'm going to use that one. I'm going to open that, and my report is going to be called Inside McDonald's Report. And I could create a sort of www dist vehicles only or whatever subtitle that you want. You could pick different formats, so you might want a PDF or CSV. I'm just going to go with the default, which is HTML. I'm going to do a weekly report, so rather than every day, I just want a weekly report to know when that comes in. Then I'm going to pick my event rule that I created. So as you recall, I created an event rule called Inside McDonald's, the event rule. And then I'm going to pick which group of vehicles that this is going to be associated with. So in this case, this is my www.dist vehicles. So that's just going to be, this is just going to be run on that group of vehicles. And then if I save that, that is now in my drop-down menu here inside McDonald's report. So that's the sort of the 3 steps to creating a geofence, creating an event rule, and then creating a report. And it's essentially the same process if you're to do a point of interest. You do the same sort of concept there. Excuse me. You can also import geofences, and you can import points of interest as well. So you can either create them manually, as we just showed here, but if you have, say, all your parks already in, say, ESRI format, we could import those in. Or if you have existing boundaries like neighborhood boundaries or district boundaries or city limits, those could also be imported in. So don't feel like you have to create those. They can also be imported in as well. Okay, so I want to leave at least 15 minutes for questions and then talk a little bit about some of the additional functionality that is available. This training was really meant to at least get the basics, show you some basics, so you can start to work with the system, and then we can always come back at a later date and get into more detail, either specifically creating geofences or getting into a little bit more detail on the reporting or those sort of things, event rules. So are there any questions at this point?
Anybody have any questions?
I just want to know if we got our on-site experts.
Yes, we do.
We're good.
But I don't think there's any particular questions at this moment.
Okay.
There may be some after the fact.
Oh, I'm sorry?
There may be some questions later on, but if so, we'll answer those or get back in touch with you.
Okay. Yeah, and just so you know, there are additional functionality that's available as well, which we didn't cover today. These are sort of more advanced training, things like dispatch routing. There's LiGO mobile as well, so it can be used on a tablet or phone. On 2 purposes. You could use it for, one, as a supervisor that wants to view vehicles on a phone or tablet. The other use is actually to someone that's in the field receiving jobs and getting turn-by-turn direction from a phone or a tablet from that standpoint. Again, those are sort of some more advanced training sessions that we can cover. There's also maintenance, a whole maintenance component, and that's really for those that are in sort of fleet maintenance that want perhaps to be notified when a vehicle needs to come in and be serviced, say every 3,000 or 5,000 miles, or even engine hours or those sort of things, because it can keep track. It basically can keep track of the odometer. There's also dashboard KPI pieces as well. And then there's LiGO Access, which is LiGO Access is the integration piece for integrating. And I know we just covered geofences briefly, but we could get into more in-depth. There's a lot of different things we can do with that in terms of importing as well as the points of interest. So these are just some additional things to be aware of that can be covered perhaps if there's some specific interest in these particular functional capabilities in the system. But I'd say the first thing is just start off with the basics, start to work with it, and then you know, you can supply questions to Lauren or team and send those over, or we can always follow up and get into some more in-depth training. So.
Alrighty. Well, if nobody has any questions, Rhett, we'll wrap it up, and then I'll be in touch with you after or later today, probably.
Okay. That sounds good.
Okay, thanks
All right,
so much.
everyone. You're welcome. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.